Do your students sometimes struggle to get their ideas down in writing because they're not really sure where to start or exactly how to write what they want to write? Well, writing can feel overwhelming without the right support, but it doesn't have to be that way. So in this episode, we explore how sentence frames and scaffolds can give students the structure they need to write confidently and accurately, while still expressing their own ideas. So whether you teach novices or more advanced learners, you'll get practical strategies that you can use right away. So let's jump in. Whether you're planning your first lesson or celebrating your 20th year in the language classroom, I understand exactly where you are. I'm Joshua Cabral, and I'm also a language teacher in my 29th year of teaching. Now, I also have the opportunity to support schools and teachers all across the country who are working towards increasing proficiency and building confidence in their students. This is the World Language Classroom Podcast, with over 200 episodes of practical strategies tested in real classrooms just like yours and mine. So let's jump in. Vamos, allons-y. Hello, my friends. Bonjour, mes amis. Hola, mis amigos. Welcome to the World Language Classroom Podcast. I am Joshua Cabral, and thank you, like always, for joining me here on the podcast, going the extra step, really wanting to support your students and to be introspective about your teaching. I know you do so much as a teacher, and this is one of those things that you do, and I think you're a teacher rock star for it. So thank you for finding the time each week to hang out with me to talk about language teaching. So this week, we are going to talk about writing, and this is a bit of an extension from last week's episode, because writing is an effective and incredibly useful way for students to show what they know. It helps them to express their identity, whatever that might be, on a personal level. It helps them to take ownership over the language. They are the ones that are producing the writing. And it also gives this opportunity to slow down and think. So it's a lot different than interpersonal spontaneous conversations where they have to listen, form ideas, figure out the pronunciation. So much of that is coming into play when we do the spontaneous interpersonal communication. But when it comes to writing, students can really slow down, give it some thought, really focus a bit more on the accuracy and rewriting and looking at things in a different way. So this concept of writing just to be able to write in the target language, yes, essentially that's going to be our goal, but it's also a very useful tool for processing ideas, expressing identity, showing their ownership over the language, and they can slow down and really think about what they're producing. But writing can also be a really intimidating skill for learners. So why is this? Because writing asks students to juggle so much. Just like when we're doing spontaneous speaking, they have to juggle understanding, producing language, pronunciation. When they're writing, they also have to juggle things like retrieving vocabulary that they want to use, or grammar choices. What's the structure of the sentence, or the word order, the syntax? Is there agreement of adjectives and verbs? What about the spelling? And then there are accents that might go on there, or organizing all the ideas together. So that is a lot to juggle when students are writing. So we need to be reminded that it's not just writing it down, but there's all those different things that students need to be considering when they're putting pen to paper or fingers to keyboard when they're writing. And they're doing it all at once. Even the most confident speakers, even first language native speakers, can get a little overwhelmed or a little anxious when they're asked to write because of that huge cognitive load that is really heavy when they have to consider all those things about grammar choices and vocabulary and spelling and organization. So there is definitely a confidence piece that comes in there. And last week on episode 239, I started this discussion of writing by looking at building confidence with short writing tasks. So be sure to listen to episode 239. I put the link in the show notes so you can go right there and listen to it. And it's a great complementary episode to this episode because it's the starting point for getting students to feel confident, to lower that affective filter, to have less anxiety, and to be more willing to take risks and feel like they are able to write. Because we need to get students to that point before they can take on the whole cognitive load of writing longer pieces. So definitely be sure to listen to episode 239. Either right now, stop this episode and listen to it, or listen to it after, but be sure to get both episodes together because they very much complement the writing process that we want to undertake with our students. So once we have students at that confident place and we've lowered their anxiety, that's where sentence frames and scaffolds come in. And that's going to be our focus for this episode. How do sentence frames and writing scaffolds help students to deal with and manage that whole cognitive load of putting all of these language pieces together when they're writing? So they provide just enough support to help students express meaningful ideas without feeling stuck or overwhelmed. That's the whole purpose of sentence frames and scaffolds. And when we design them thoughtfully, these tools don't lower our expectations of students, but what they will do is increase success because they invite students into risk-taking instead of shutting down when it comes to writing. So the goal of scaffolding writing is not to simplify writing or to simplify the writing process. The goal is to support students in communicating clearly and meaningfully while they're building accuracy over time. So that's truly what the goal is here. It's to support them in growing towards increased accuracy. And part of scaffolds can be sentence frames. So sentence frames and scaffolds are not about giving answers. So they are about reducing that cognitive load. They're about highlighting patterns and modeling structures and making expectations visible. So that's what we're doing. And so much of that is going to decrease the cognitive load and lower anxiety. So think of them as training wheels. We don't put training wheels on a bike because we expect students to use them forever. We use them so learners can experience success early and then build balance gradually. So when we create leveled scaffolds and then intentionally reduce that support over time, students move toward independence with confidence rather than fear. So the idea of providing this structure, these frames, these scaffolds, is not that they're always going to have them, but they're going to have them to feel successful early on, and then we gradually release them, provide fewer until we provide nothing at all, and students are able to write on their own. They're able to ride the bike without the training wheels. So let's look at some specific classroom strategies. So what exactly is a sentence frame and what does it do? So let's clarify that. So something important to keep in mind is that sentence frames are not fill-in-the-blank worksheets. They can look like that if you look at a sentence frame because it's words with blanks in it. But what they really do is they model sentence structure. And this is also reinforcing high-frequency patterns. That's what you want to be in the frame. And then you're encouraging students to add in language that is going to elaborate. So you're encouraging them to elaborate on the sentence frame. So this is not about providing the answers and the structures, but modeling it so that students get used to that sentence structure and it's reinforced through high-frequency patterns, and then you're encouraging them to build upon that. So even if it's one sentence to start with, the expectation is they're building subsequent sentences on their own. So the sentence frame or the sentence starter is a starting point. So for example, you could ask students to write about your weekend, and they might look at that and think, okay, where do I start? Do I start by saying on Saturday, I'm not sure what I do about the verb. Do I talk about which thing I did? When did I do it? So there's a lot of possibilities that can come up with that. And when we get to the point where students have used scaffolds and we can remove our sentence frames and our scaffolds and all of that, then students can write on their own. But early on, instead of write about your weekend, you could give them the sentence frame that this weekend I blank with blank. And they are just starting with this weekend I saw a movie with my brother. This weekend I had a soccer game with my friends. Or you could say, this weekend I blank because blank. So this weekend I went to a party because it was my cousin's birthday. So the frame is helping students to fill in the language they have. And then moving forward, when they're writing about this where you don't give them the frame and you change it out a little bit and you say, what did you do 2 weeks ago? What did you do last week? They can use this frame because they've gotten used to the structure of using it. So this small frame or writing structure really encourages detail. When you say write about your weekend, they can say, I had a game, I saw a movie, I worked, I went to the mall. But when you say this weekend I because, or this weekend I blank with, all of that is encouraging more detail. And it's also supporting a logical connection. Like, this is how you add detail to your sentence. And it's reinforcing the grammar pattern, the syntax of the sentence, but it's also keeping the focus on the meaning. So even with that frame, students are still generating ideas. The frame just removes the blank page paralysis and not knowing where to start. And again, you do eventually want to pull that frame away. They're not always going to use it, and change it up a little bit because you want to take the training wheels off. But the frame is early on so that they find success with the training wheels. So let's look at some types of scaffolds that you can use. So sentence starters and sentence frames are really great for novice learners. You could provide sentences such as, I like to blank because blank. In my family, there is or are blank. One difference between blank and blank is blank. So those are very useful for novice level students because they are filling in novice level language, which means single words or phrases, but within a full sentence, which if they created it on their own would be more intermediate level. So you're helping them to start to build with the language that they have by providing these frames. And these also help students organize ideas and practice target structures without worrying how to begin. That's always the hardest thing, is where do I start when students are told to write something. So those are our sentence starters or sentence frames, but then we can have paragraph frames, and these are perfect for intermediate learners, where you could have an example such as, first I blank, then I blank, and finally I blank. Or I think it is important because. So this is a way for students to start the paragraph. Give them the first couple of words, once upon a time, so that they are able to continue from there. So it doesn't just have to be a sentence frame, it can be a paragraph frame as well, where you're providing the words that are showing the order of events. So first, then, finally, sort of the chronology of what they're writing about. And this is going to support sequencing, the narration, and explanation while still allowing for creativity. And then another type of scaffold is to provide word banks, but with purpose. So not random vocabulary lists, but they are curated. They are intentional in what you're providing. So for example, these could be transition words. So this would most likely be more for your high, intermediate to advanced students. Transition words, opinion phrases, which if your language has a subjunctive, it would require that. Some descriptive adjectives or time markers where you're not just writing in the present tense, but in the future, the past, the distant past, or the present progressive, whatever your language might have. So providing these word banks are not just random vocabulary or simple nouns, but they are the words and phrases that are going to help even our more advanced learners to put their ideas together and have a frame of where to start from. So instead of guessing language, students choose from meaningful options and focus on communication. Another type of scaffold could be a model text or a mentor text that can act as a scaffold. So students can imitate the structure, or they can swap out details, notice patterns, or maybe even recycle phrases. So giving students the opportunity to see what this paragraph will look like will help them to create it on their own. And this is going to reinforce the grammar in context rather than in isolation. So as I said at the very beginning, when we have these sentence frames and these scaffolds, it is not that they're going to use them forever. So it's not that students are always going to be able to fall back and use these, but there is this idea of the gradual release. This is the most important part. Scaffolds should not stay the same all year or even throughout a unit. We want to gradually remove the support. So for example, week 1, students say, I like to blank because blank. And then the following week, you're still in this unit, and the prompt becomes, I like to blank because blank and blank. So they're adding 2 things onto it. And then by the end of the unit, you can ask them, describe what you like to do and explain why. So now they're not using the frame anymore, but they've used it enough that they're able to do it on their own. So you can see we could start with describe what you like to do and explain why. That could be very overwhelming for students. But if you give them the practice with the frames, have them elaborate on the frames, and then start to remove them, and then in the end, you can just give them the whole prompt without the frame, that's when you're taking the training wheels off. So you're focusing on the same structure, but there's less visual support. And students begin to internalize the patterns instead of depending on them. And this gradual release builds confidence and competence simultaneously. And then there's one concern that sometimes teachers have that I hear about, and it is that if I give frames, will students become dependent on them? And I think what you will see is that students build accuracy over time. So the answer depends on how you use the frames. If the frames are used as a permanent scaffold or a crutch, then yes, students are not going to build proficiency over time. But if the frames are used strategically and then reduced, they become stepping stones. And so that students don't become dependent on them, they become dependent on themselves because they've internalized the structure. And also important to keep in mind is that these sentence frames help students to notice agreement patterns and to practice verb conjugations in context rather than just writing verb conjugations. They're building longer sentences and they're expanding on ideas naturally without the cognitive load of trying to figure it all out at once. And their accuracy will improve because students are repeatedly using structures correctly within meaningful communication. And then there's also the element of encouraging risk-taking. So scaffolds change the emotional climate, I guess you could say, of writing and how students approach it. Because when students know how to start and what structure to follow and also what structure will look like, then they're going to be more willing to try new vocabulary. If they're just relying all on themselves at the beginning, they're going to stick to concrete vocabulary that they absolutely know because they know they have to put it in a sentence with connecting words and all of this other stuff. But if you give them the frame, then they don't have to worry about that early on, and they can trust themselves to take some risks and try new vocabulary and not just the expected vocabulary, and then to add in even more detail, where they are essentially experimenting with complexity. So instead of asking, is this right, they'll start asking, can I say more? And that shift is really huge. So regardless if you have novice level students, intermediate, or even advanced level students, these frames can be really applicable to all of the levels. So here are a few ways that you could integrate frames really naturally into your classroom. So after reading, even an intermediate class, an advanced level class, students could have the frame, the character feels blank because blank. And they're just focusing on that. Or after listening to something, one thing I learned is blank. Or during a cultural comparison, they could say, in whatever country, people blank, but in blank country, people do this. So they're doing the comparison of in this country, people do this, but in this country, people do that. Or an exit ticket as students are leaving. Today, I understood blank, but I still have a question about blank. So you could use these at any proficiency level, and this is going to help students to release all of the anxiety and the cognitive load and to help them to write more. But again, we don't want to keep them there all the time. If they've done the character feels blank because blank several times, then you can just ask them to reply to the prompt about what characters feel like without needing the structure because you're going to take those training wheels off. So if you would like to dive a little deeper into this and you feel like you could do this really well, but maybe you need a little more help with some of the sentence frames and scaffolds for different proficiency levels, I would recommend that you take a look at my Ready for Tomorrow Quick Win PD course that guides you in supporting students with sentence frames and scaffolds at all levels. And the link is in the show notes for that. And in this 30-minute course, you'll learn how and when to use sentence frames and scaffolds to support writing, how to design leveled scaffolds that promote accuracy and expression, and you'll see clear and concrete examples at various proficiency levels, as well as ways to gradually reduce support to encourage independence, and how to use student writing to inform your instruction. So in each course, you get a detailed audio lesson that you can listen to anytime. There is a PDF document that has all of the notes, all of the examples. There is a planning template that you can print out and use in your classroom. There are also reflection prompts to guide your planning. And after you've worked through the entire course, you can get your personalized certificate of completion for your PD records, as well as specific feedback from me on a lesson plan idea that you submit. So this course on sentence frames and scaffolds is available individually or as part of the growing Quick Win PD bundle, where you get every current course and all future courses at one great value. So I'd like to leave you with a project for this week. So here is what I would like you to do. Choose a writing task that you already use and create a sentence frame or a scaffold to support your students. Try it with one group and notice how the added structure changes their confidence and their expression with language. And then ask students to reflect on how that support helped. And if you want to have that clear practical system for designing these supports across proficiency levels, be sure to check out my Quick Win PD course on improving student writing with sentence frames and scaffolds. The link is in the show notes, or you can visit my website, wlclassroom.com/writingframes. So thank you for listening and for all the incredible work you're doing to help your students become confident, real-world communicators. If you're ready to take the next step with proficiency-focused teaching, check out the PD opportunities I've created. You'll find all of that in the show notes as well as on my website. I will talk to you soon. Bye for now. Thank you for listening. Be sure to follow or subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. And let's stay connected on social media. You can find me at WL Classroom pretty much everywhere. You'll also find lots of ideas, suggestions, and resources on my website, wlclassroom.com. Now stay curious, keep learning, and continue the great work you do inspiring and supporting your students.